Scramble by I Had Him on the Ropes, Carter Reed, and Rory Gone Maddie, Rose Tinted Days. Chapter 5, Day 393. It took Bruce an embarrassingly long time to uncover that the journalist who had written the previous 3 stories about the newly christened Justice League was Superman. In his defense, Bruce hadn't actually read the articles, although Alfred had. His mentor had mentioned a few details that seemed a little too on the nose for someone who wasn't there. A single search on Google and... "His name is Clark Kent," Bruce said to Alfred's retreating back. "He's a reporter for the Daily Planet." He shook his head in disbelief. "Alfred, Superman is press. My soulmate is a fucking journalist." Alfred paused, eyes narrowing slightly, ignoring the heat and profanity in the sentence. "I'm assuming that Clark does not know the same truth about your dual identity, Master Bruce." There was almost disapproval in his tone, something that a few months ago would have made him seethe. Now he just felt like rolling his eyes. "No," Bruce replied, as though the notion was ridiculous. "He is an investigative reporter," Alfred muttered, reading the screen before him that painted Superman's human achievements and job in stark black on white, and letting something seep into his tone. "He doesn't know. He's not that good an investigator." "Who is, in the face of the world's best detective?" Alfred replied, a little too snidely for it to be meant as a compliment. "He doesn't know," Bruce parroted. "He'll never know," he swore, shaking his head. Alfred sighed quietly, irritation turning to something sad and disappointed. "Never is an awfully long time, Master Bruce, especially as you are now teammates." Teammates? They weren't, but Bruce sighed resolute as he watched his mentor walk away. They were. Although while it had taken him far too long to work out that the 6-foot dark-haired blue-eyed moral justice was also the 6-foot dark-haired blue-eyed glasses-wearing farm boy, it was only a few days after their unofficial team-up, alien invasion prevention, that he had folders bursting with information on the other members, their life, their names and aliases, their blood types, how they took their coffee, what side of the bed they slept on. If it was remotely personal, Bruce had obtained it. Well, Bruce, Batman, Matches Malone, and a few others had obtained it. Some of the identities of his companions had been difficult and, upon learning them, impressive. It wasn't every day Bruce could say he knew that an Amazon princess started her morning with a matcha tea latte, or the King of Atlantis had been fined $120 5 nights ago for speeding. On the other hand, while Wonder Woman and Aquaman gave Bruce pride in his investigative abilities, he felt like thumping his head against a desk with others. They, unfortunately, were embarrassingly easy. And by they, he meant the Flash. Anyone who hadn't worked out that Barry Allen was the Flash was, as far as Bruce was concerned, an idiot. An idiot! Between the frequent coincidences, mainly the Flash disappearing and Barry reappearing, his incredibly successful conviction rate, often with evidence that seemed to be gathered by extra-human means, and the volume of CCTV footage that saw Barry Allen moving at the speed of sound or creating lightning, it was obvious. Bruce was just grateful that Barry seemed to attract the villains who were too busy posturing or trying to pull off unnecessarily complicated crimes to actually uncover his identity. God help the kid if the Joker turned his gaze to Central City. It'd be a bloodbath. He'd made a snide suggestion to the scientist a week previously, mere days after completing the set and having names for all of them. They'd once again been forced to work together after Lex Luthor primed a nuclear warhead, encased it in lead, and hid it somewhere on the East Coast. Something about land and property and controlling the world. Bruce tended to tune out motives because they were often too harebrained and crazy to follow. If the world weren't in jeopardy, he would, however, have taken a fair few minutes to enjoy the panicked, vulnerable look on Superman's. On Clark's face when realizing he couldn't just fly around and look at things intensely to solve the problem. A solution, it seemed, that was pretty much Superman's thing. Other than rambling lectures about ethics, morality, and the basic good people had in their arts. The Kryptonian had blushed a dark, almost violet crimson when he'd realized, before murmuring a distressed, "I can't help," to Wonder Woman out of the corner of his mouth. The others could help, though, and with a few glares and sniping from Bruce, not to mention a brilliant tactical plan, of course, the crisis was averted. It was after the warhead had been deposited back into the hands of the government. It had been stolen from, not that Bruce really considered that safe, that Bruce had pinned Flash with a look. It had been only an offhand comment, but the Flash had gone far too still, and what was visible beneath the cowl paled instantly. "You know the name?" he had stuttered, sounding every inch the boy he practically was. "As I said," Batman replied, deadpan and uncaring of the stress that was now driving Barry to vibrate through the floor. "You need to be more proactive with concealing your identity." "Oh my God!" Barry breathed, voice quiet and soft and a touch desperate. "Oh my God!" "Batman," Wonder Woman chided, taking pity on the boy. "Diana," he replied, finding some internal amusement at watching her eyebrow twitch. A telltale sign she was surprised, but still able to keep a firm hold on her emotions. "I am well versed on all your identities." He paused, noting the general, albeit muted, panic. Bruce sighed. "Considering you have shared your names between yourselves, I don't understand why my knowing is a worry." "Because you don't like us!" Barry screeched, voice jumping several octaves as his face began to purple and his legs began to flit in and out of visibility. Bruce nearly rolled his eyes. "I have no intention of blackmailing you, Flash, but I wouldn't have agreed to this team." He scowled, the word sitting bitter on his tongue. "Without knowing who you were." "You have known all this time?" Diana asked, eyes narrow. "Yes," Bruce lied, voice deceivingly flat. He could hear Alfred's rebuking tut in his mind, but focused on keeping his heart rate steady, save Mr. Nosey tilted his ear in Bruce's direction and took a listen to his heart. The regulator that usually projected a steady sound to prevent Superman from hearing his heart had been broken in the fight. Fucking Luthor! At least the lead-lined cowl held strong. He had no intention of letting Captain X-Ray have a peek at his face in a moment of curiosity. "This is a serious breach of trust, Batman," Superman chimed in, and Bruce willed himself not to rage at the words. Instead, he turned to the hero. "Was this ever about trust?" he asked bluntly, aware that everyone there knew the answer, before adding, "A dry idealism over this group is beginning to wear thin on both myself and your readers, Kent." A curse, wide eyes, and Barry almost in tears had seen the quick disbanding of their little gathering after that particular comment, with Wonder Woman taking it upon herself to soothe Barry and Clark through their separate identity crises. Batman had turned to go, although not before Arthur clapped him on the shoulder with a grin that spoke volumes as to his humor at the situation and said, "You're a funny man, Batman, but I like Flash. Let's try not to let him get that color again." Bruce hadn't heard from them since. It had been quiet until that morning. There was no disaster, and Bruce had taken the day to be proactive, actually attending meetings and doing paperwork, ignoring the quiet disbelief from his staff at seeing Brucey Wayne actually working. Lucius helped, though, of course, although the conversations did tend to stray a little out of W.E. and into the developments he had managed to make in his nightly activities. They were hip-deep in forms and musing on the best way to launch a covert space station into orbit discreetly when the communicator beeped, signaling he'd been summoned for a meeting. A meeting, apparently, that was occurring instantly. He did roll his eyes then, and although Lucius smirked and gestured he'd go, Bruce shook his head. He made sure the modulator was functioning before connecting to Diana. "Batman," she greeted. "I trust you saw the summons?" "I am unavailable," he said, eyes looking out the window and beyond. "This is important, Batman." Diana continued, voice a little too off for it to be nothing. We need you. Bruce scowled at the admission. How had these heroes managed without him thus far if they needed him as often as they proclaimed to, he wondered. Why? There was a pause. This is a secure connection. Kyle has found another possible member for the League, Diana explained. Of course he had. Bruce bit back a snarl. Why did he... You'll join us, Batman? Diana was saying. Where? Bruce snapped, annoyance bleeding into his tone, even with the modulator. Diana must have heard it because she paused a little too long before offering. There's an abandoned building complex in Metropolis, she offered. I'll send the address. With that, she signed off. Skulking around abandoned buildings, Bruce scowled, tossing down the communicator with disgust. If this is going to work, we need a base working, Fox. I can't swan in and out of Metropolis like this. Lucius didn't say a word, only smiled a little too smugly, and for a moment, Bruce wondered just how much time the man had been spending with Alfred, because they looked awfully similar in that moment. They parted ways, Bruce signaling for the Batplane, cloaked in enough tech that even Superman would say it was stealthy, to meet him on the roof. A quick change and the benefit of dying light glinting over his city, and Bruce was airborne, powering his way to the address Diana had given him and cursing with everything he had that his idiot soulmate had not led them into a trap of some sorts. In a way, Bruce wished it had been a trap. The hero's name was Green Lantern, and he had apparently run into Kent on the streets of Metropolis several days earlier, and after a heart-to-heart and some alien-on-alien fighting, had decided that he would be best joining their fresh-faced team. Bruce was not impressed, especially as he had begun by saying, Hey everyone, I'm Hal. Like the meeting was an icebreaker the first day of college. Bruce was grinding his teeth so loudly that even Flash had begun to cast worrying glances in his direction, which was impressive, given that he had taken to Jordan as though they had been friends since birth. Their meeting deteriorated even further when, in an indignant sort of way, Hal had said, Wait! He's only human! Pointing at Bruce as though he were the strangest one among them. It was then, interestingly, that Kirby stepped in. I kid. He began, gesturing a little too forcefully with his trident, if his smile was to be believed. Don't piss off the bat. It's just... The Lantern spluttered, looking to Superman for help. Clark, however, was clearly doing his best not to laugh at the man's expense before shooting a look at Batman like they had just shared a joke. Bruce did not want to think about the Man of Steel's apparent belief that they were going to be friends. I think you'll be a good addition to the team, Lantern, Diana began. If you can fight, of course, Victor added with a smile, tilting his head to the left. If you can, then... Well, you got my vote. Oh, cool, we're voting? I'm gonna vote! Barry grinned. Hell yeah! He laughed before. What about you, Big Blue? I wouldn't have suggested it otherwise, Barry. Clark grinned. They turned to Arthur. Aye, he shrugged. I'm down. We could use all the help we can get, I think. It was then they swiveled their gaze to Bruce. Batman was, of course, seething. Angry at their carelessness, the willingness to throw away their identities like they were nothing, giving away trust like it came in droves, and there was a burning sensation in his chest at the way they were all so willing to bring new people into the fold. I believe I've been outvoted, he offered instead. Flash, clearly taking this as a yes, whooped and high-fived Lantern, who had narrowed his eyes at the answer. What? He smirked with all the confidence of a man who regularly got what he wanted. Bruce knew because he regularly wore such an expression. Aren't you going to tell me who you are? There was a weighted silence before Bruce replied, I'm Batman, before turning on his heel and striding away, leaving Flash to add, and that's him being polite!